The crystal chandeliers in the South Park ballroom threw harsh, splintered light across the massive stage, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the heavy air. The scent of roasted prime rib and expensive. Suffocating jasmine perfume hung thick over the wealthy crowd. My father's hand, perfectly manicured and trembling slightly with adrenaline, gripped the microphone stand. With his other hand, he pushed a thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope directly against my chest. 200 of the most elite, ruthless real estate investors in Charlotte stared up at us in absolute, breathless silence. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes had ceased entirely. I opened the flap of the envelope. The gold, embossed legal seal of our family attorney glared back at me under the stage lights. It was a notarized disownment letter, a formal, legally binding eviction from the Bennett family legacy, signed in sharp black ink by my own parents. To my right, standing just off the edge of the stage in a blood-red designer dress, my younger sister Paige held her smartphone high above her head. The red recording light blinked steadily. She was live streaming the exact agonizing moment of my public execution to 40,000 strangers. Eager to capture a viral breakdown, I swallowed the thick lump forming in my throat. I forced my jaw shut until my teeth ground together. I traced the sharp, unforgiving edge of the paper with my thumb. The expensive cardstock pressed deeply into my skin. I folded the letter precisely in half, refusing to let my hands shake. I slipped the document into my small evening bag, lifted my chin, and locked eyes with my father. I offered him a single, flat, emotionless nod. 1 hour earlier, the agonizing architecture of my family's emotional abuse had been quietly established. My husband Spencer and I were deliberately seated at table 18. In the strict, unspoken social hierarchy of a billionaire real estate gala. Table 18 was the ultimate containment zone. We were shoved aggressively against the brushed steel swinging doors of the bustling catering kitchen, forced to listen to the shouted orders of the wait staff. The VIP tables near the stage gleamed brightly with cascading white orchids and towering crystal flutes of vintage champagne. We were provided with lukewarm tap water and wilting. Grocery store carnations shoved carelessly into a cheap glass vase. As a high school special education teacher, I spend my days navigating intense sensory overloads, managing emotional dysregulation, and de-escalating teenage meltdowns. I work in severely underfunded classrooms where success is measured by a student finally learning to regulate their breathing, or grasping a basic math concept after weeks of grueling struggle. That deep psychological background made me uniquely equipped to survive my toxic family. My mother, Vanessa, considered my career a spectacular, embarrassing failure. To her, people were only worth the liquid capital they controlled. Empathy was a massive weakness. Wealth was the only acceptable metric of human value. She strutted past our table before the appetizers were even served. Her silver silk gown catching the ambient light. She paused just long enough to drop a biting, calculated remark about Spencer's beat-up 10-year-old pickup truck parked out in the valet lot. She loudly called him a broke, freelance computer technician who was aggressively dragging down the pristine Bennett family reputation. Spencer did not react to the poison in her voice. He just smiled warmly, adjusted his simple navy blazer, and took a slow sip of his water. My sister Paige trailed right behind our mother, her camera already active and focused. Paige was a wealthy lifestyle vlogger who routinely weaponized cruelty for social media content. She pointed the high-definition lens directly at my face, tossing out rapid-fire condescending insults about my public school salary. She mocked my simple black dress. She was desperately hoping to bait me into a screaming match or a tearful exit. I deployed my professional training immediately. I gave her the gray rock method. Blank face, flat tone, zero emotional feedback. I simply blinked at her and took a bite of my salad. Deprived of the chaotic drama she desperately needed to entertain her followers, Paige huffed heavily and stormed away, her face tight with immense, silent frustration. They wanted a reaction. They wanted my tears to validate their absolute superiority. I refused to give them a single drop of emotional fuel. The gala was originally supposed to be my 31st birthday dinner. Instead, my father hijacked the gathering to announce his massive new South Park commercial development, turning my personal milestone into a grotesque corporate press release. That relentless greed led directly to the moment on stage, the presentation of the letter, and the absolute severing of our blood ties. His speech was venomous. He called me a financial leech who drained family resources while providing zero return on investment. I walked down the carpeted stairs of the stage, my sensible heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Spencer met me at the bottom of the steps. He wrapped his warm, steady hand around mine. We turned our backs on my father and headed straight toward the exit. Before we could take 3 steps toward freedom, the heavy, brass-studded oak doors of the ballroom swung open violently. The governor of North Carolina walked in, flanked by a massive, imposing political security detail. My father's eyes lit up with sheer greed. He rushed forward, his chest puffed out, arm extended to claim the spotlight, assuming the politician was there to endorse the new real estate venture. The governor walked right past him without a single glance. He completely bypassed the most powerful real estate mogul in Charlotte and marched straight to the dark. Forgotten back of the room, he marched directly to table 18. The governor extended both of his hands to Spencer. His voice boomed across the incredibly silent, echoing room, profusely thanking my husband for the $100 million state education initiative his private foundation had fully funded that very morning. He praised Spencer for bringing high-speed broadband and digital libraries to 50 rural counties across the state. Hundreds of smartphones instantly illuminated the dim ballroom. Elite investors, local politicians, and rival developers frantically typed Spencer's name into their search engines. Sharp, audible gasps rippled through the wealthy crowd as the undeniable truth materialized on their glowing screens. My husband was not a struggling freelance tech guy. He was a deeply reclusive, immensely wealthy education, technology titan. He was also the silent, anonymous majority backer holding the critical debt for my father's entire commercial empire. My father's face drained of all color, turning the shade of old parchment. He stumbled toward us, his hands shaking, frantically trying to spin the narrative, stammering out desperate apologies and calling Spencer his beloved son-in-law. Spencer stood completely still. He did not grab the microphone. He did not make a theatrical, screaming scene. He simply looked directly at my father's chief financial officer, who was standing paralyzed near the edge of the stage. Spencer's voice was completely level, cold, and precise. It carried effortlessly through the utterly quiet room. He stated that his foundation's executive board had met earlier that afternoon. They had officially voted to completely pull out of Bennett Enterprises' upcoming South Park commercial development, citing a strict morals clause. He noted that his legal team had already emailed the formal notice of absolute withdrawal. Without his final signature on the closing documents tomorrow morning, my father's massive, heavily leveraged bridge loan would automatically default at midnight. Poor unadulterated panic seized my father. He turned wildly to the governor, begging him to intervene, pleading for the state government to step in and secure the failing development project to save jobs. The governor looked at my father with sheer, unfiltered disgust. He turned to his own chief of staff and ordered him to cancel all state development contracts with Bennett Enterprises immediately, stating loudly that he refused to have his political office tied to a toxic financial liability. The heavy security detail swiftly escorted the governor out of the ballroom. The elite crowd, sensing the instant death of a dynasty, literally turned their backs. They physically shifted their chairs and their bodies, isolating my parents on their own empty stage. Spencer and I walked out into the cool, humid North Carolina evening air. I pulled out my phone and permanently blocked my entire family's phone numbers. The silence that settled over me in the cab ride home was intoxicating. It felt like a clean, definitive victory. But toxic wealth never surrenders quietly. Deprived of Spencer's massive funding tranche, Bennett Enterprises plunged headfirst into an immediate, catastrophic liquidity crisis. They were facing total default and the absolute destruction of their legacy. My mother, driven by pure greed and a desperate, clawing need to preserve her high society status, executed a deeply malicious extortion plot. 2 days later, she bypassed a petty civil lawsuit entirely. She filed a formal, highly fraudulent whistleblower complaint with the Internal Revenue Service and the State Attorney General. She submitted cleverly forged wire transfers and deeply fabricated internal corporate records, claiming that I had secretly embezzled $450,000 from the Bennett Family Trust to build Spencer's Education Foundation from the ground up. She intentionally leaked the massive federal investigation to the local Charlotte press. Her goal was ruthless and perfectly calculated. She wanted to weaponize the federal legal system to freeze Spencer's foundation assets, permanently destroy my public teaching license, and force us into a multi-million-dollar out-of-court settlement just to save their collapsing real estate empire. My mother fully believed her bureaucratic warfare had cornered us. She severely underestimated the lethal danger of her own towering arrogance. To make her forged embezzlement documents look authentic to highly trained federal investigators, she needed realistic financial data. She foolishly pulled active routing and account numbers from one of my father's actual, highly restricted offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. By formally entering these deeply illegal documents into a federal court record to frame me, my mother legally waived her own corporate confidentiality. She essentially kicked the vault door wide open to the federal discovery phase. Spencer's elite defense lawyers did not waste time with long, dragging administrative delays. They bypassed the standard red tape entirely. They brought the forged financial files straight to a federal judge during an emergency injunction hearing. They simply pointed out that the routing numbers provided by the plaintiff traced directly back to an undeclared illegal offshore repository that bypassed American tax laws. The Honorable Marcus Hayes looked at the routing numbers, took off his glasses, and immediately signed the sweeping unsealing order. By attempting to ruin my life and my reputation, my mother had inadvertently handed the federal government the exact map and the perfect legal key to my father's secret. Multi-million-dollar tax shelter. The institutional fallout was swift, completely devastating, and entirely public. The federal judge unsealed the offshore evidence immediately, triggering a massive real-time panic among my father's remaining investors and creditors. Every major commercial bank instantly called in their bridge loans. The mighty Bennett real estate empire collapsed into total bankruptcy within 48 hours. Federal marshals and aggressive bank liquidators descended on the sprawling South Park estate to enforce civil asset forfeiture. Paige stood on the manicured, pristine sidewalk weeping openly on a frantic live stream as federal workers systematically changed the locks on her mansion and loaded her silver Porsche and black Range Rover onto flatbed tow trucks. Her comment section completely flipped. The exact same followers who had laughed at me days earlier now viciously mocked her, tearing her apart for her family's publicly exposed. Humiliating fraud. Inside their frozen, empty estate, my parents watched their carefully curated legacy get stripped away piece by piece. They were fully ruined by the transactional, merciless society they worshipped, back in the safety of my quiet, sunlit kitchen. My phone screen lit up repeatedly with their desperate, blocked voicemails. I set the device face down on the cool granite counter. I was completely untainted by their ruin. I sat next to Spencer, sipping hot, dark coffee, calmly reviewing my special education lesson plans for Monday morning. Looking back at the smoldering wreckage of my family's empire, the raw truth of my survival became stunningly clear. The public disownment at the Gala was never truly about my career choice. It was never about Spencer's perceived income. It was an aggressive, perfectly calculated tactic to maintain absolute control over my identity. When a toxic family system realizes they can no longer manipulate your self-worth or dictate your personal boundaries, their final, desperate move is always to manage the public narrative. They must make you look like the crazy, ungrateful villain so they can remain the flawless victims in the eyes of their wealthy peers. Growing up inside a billionaire real estate dynasty, I learned early on that high society operates on a terrifyingly sterile emotional economy. People who worship money eventually view everything through the rigid lens of leverage. They treat human relationships as literal financial balance sheets. Children are not nurtured or protected. They are brutally assessed. You are either a performing asset who brings prestige, high-level connections, and total compliance to the family portfolio, or you are a dangerous liability who threatens their carefully curated image. Because I chose a life of public service, because I valued the quiet, invisible triumph of helping a traumatized teenager read over the loud, arrogant vanity of closing a commercial property deal, I was permanently marked as a liability. The notarized disownment letter was supposed to be my ultimate punishment. It was supposed to exile me into the cold, forcing me to crawl back on my knees. Instead, it became the absolute beautiful emancipation of my soul. Surviving that kind of systemic emotional abuse requires far more than just walking away. It requires a fundamental, painful rewiring of exactly how you perceive love, loyalty, and your own inherent value in the world. Through the intense fire of that public execution and the chaotic legal warfare that followed, I forged 3 absolute rules for protecting my peace. Rule number 1, starve the monster. When dealing with deep narcissistic abuse, your absolute silence is an offensive weapon. Toxic people orchestrate public humiliation because they desperately feed on your emotional dysregulation. They constantly crave your tears, your explosive anger, and your frantic self-defense to validate their own crumbling power. They want you to scream loudly so they can call you crazy. They want you to fight back aggressively so they can claim you are the abusive one. Apply the gray rock method relentlessly. Give them a blank, impenetrable wall. Offer them flat, emotionless responses. Do not explain yourself. Do not defend your character to people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you. When you totally deprive them of your emotional energy, you watch them suffocate on their own venom. My sister pointed a camera at my face, expecting a viral breakdown. I gave her absolutely nothing, and it drove her to total madness. Rule number 2, recognize transactional love. Blood guarantees a biological connection. It never, ever guarantees systemic loyalty or emotional safety. Society conditions us to deeply believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred debt we owe simply because we happen to share genetics. But if a parent or a partner's love is entirely contingent on your total compliance, your career prestige, or your financial output, it is not real love. It is a high-interest corporate transaction dressed up as affection. You are not required to pay interest on a toxic debt you never agreed to take on. When people explicitly show you that their acceptance has a heavy price tag, believe them the first time. You have the absolute right to close the account permanently, without an ounce of guilt and without a second of hesitation. The exact moment my father handed me that notarized letter, he proved that his affection was entirely conditional. My husband pulling his state funding proved that real-world consequences are universal. Rule number 3, abandon the need for closure. The greatest, most dangerous trap of the black sheep, the ultimate scapegoat of any toxic family, is spending a lifetime desperately trying to prove your worth to people who actively benefit from making you feel worthless. I spent decades hoping my parents would eventually respect my choices, hoping they would see the vital value in my special education classroom, hoping they would look at me with pride instead of cold calculation. I had to accept a devastating but incredibly liberating reality. They were never going to see my worth because my independence fundamentally threatened their control. You will never, ever get a genuine apology from someone who deeply believes their cruelty is perfectly justified. Waiting for their validation is exactly like waiting for rain in a barren desert. True, unshakable freedom only begins the exact second you stop asking for their permission to exist. The aftermath of the Bennett Empire's spectacular collapse was swift and absolute. The federal judge sentenced my mother to 6 years in state prison for aggressive federal tax evasion and wire fraud, with strict eligibility for parole only after 4 years. The court ordered restitution for $12,400,000 in back taxes and penalties, brutally liquidating every single remaining asset they had tried to hide in offshore accounts. My father struck a humiliating plea deal to avoid a much longer sentence, spending his twilight years in a minimum security facility, entirely stripped of his immense pride and his exclusive country club memberships. Their friends, the elite society they gladly sacrificed me for, abandoned them the very second the federal indictments were officially unsealed. A few months ago, a plain white letter arrived at my high school. It was officially stamped from the state correctional facility. The slanted handwriting belonged to my mother. The front of the envelope was slightly stained, the black ink somewhat blurred. I held it in my hands, feeling the physical weight of the paper. I knew exactly what it contained. It would be a hollow, predictable echo of the past. It would be a masterclass in manipulation, filled with desperate phrases about how she was still my mother, how family always forgives, how she did it all to protect our legacy. I checked my pulse against my wrist. It was perfectly steady. My chest remained completely clear. My hand stayed entirely still. I did not open the letter. I did not tear it up in a dramatic fit of rage. I simply walked over to the blue recycling bin in the staff lounge and dropped it inside, right next to the discarded lesson plans and empty coffee cups. I walked back to my classroom and quietly closed the door. My life now is profoundly quiet, and that absolute quiet is my greatest wealth. My chosen family is built tightly on a solid foundation of mutual respect and unconditional support. My husband looks at me and sees an equal partner, not a financial asset to be leveraged. My colleagues and my students treat me with a genuine dignity my blood relatives never could. We spend our weekends hiking high in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, smelling the sharp scent of the pine trees, far away from crystal chandeliers, corporate galas, and toxic expectations. We eat dinner at a small, scarred wooden table, and we laugh until our ribs physically ache. There are no cameras recording our every move. There are no secret financial ledgers. There is only peace. If you are sitting at an overflow table in your own family, waiting desperately for an invitation to the main event, hear me right now. Stop waiting. Stand up. Walk out of that room and build your own table. Has someone in your life tried to use money or status to keep you incredibly small? Have you been held hostage by the toxic illusion of conditional love? Share your exact story in the comments below. Let your fierce survival be the blueprint for someone else's escape. It is time we stop letting toxic people hold the pen to our lives. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there thinking, why on earth did Morgan even go to that gala in the first place? Why did she put up with decades of emotional abuse from parents who treated her like a defective corporate asset? It is so easy to judge when you are watching from the outside. But let me break down the psychology of what was actually happening to her. Morgan was not weak, and she certainly was not stupid. She was trapped in something psychologists call the slot machine effect, also known as intermittent reinforcement. When a toxic family starves you of love and respect for months, but then suddenly invites you to a birthday dinner or offers a single, tiny compliment, it hits your brain exactly like pulling a lever at a casino. You keep playing the game, you keep showing up, enduring the losses, hoping for a jackpot of genuine affection that is never, ever going to come. They do not give you a seat at the table to feed you. They feed you crumbs of hope just to keep you in the game. Now, let us talk about the absolute masterclass in financial and legal self-defense we just witnessed. Morgan and Spencer did not just survive. They executed a flawless tactical retreat. First, let us look at the emotional audit. When her sister shoved a camera in her face, Morgan deployed the Grey Rock method. Narcissists and emotional scammers thrive on chaos. They want your tears because it proves they have power over you. By giving them a blank wall and zero reaction, Morgan completely audited their emotional control and shut off their supply. Second, the leverage lock. Notice exactly what Spencer did at that gala. He did not grab the microphone and scream. He exercised his strict contractual rights. He formally withheld his final signature on that $100 million bridge loan, in life and in business. Whoever holds the capital holds the leverage. Always know the exact terms of your agreements. Look for the morals clause. And never, ever surrender your signature out of guilt. Finally, the discovery trap. When Morgan's mother filed that fake whistleblower complaint, she made the ultimate arrogant mistake. Scammers hate details, but arrogant scammers get sloppy with them. By using a real offshore Cayman routing number to make her forgery look authentic, she handed federal investigators the exact key to her own destruction. Spencer's legal team did not have to play dirty. They just weaponized the discovery phase and let the toxic family's own financial hubris do the heavy lifting. Here is the final verdict. You cannot out-manipulate a toxic person, but you can absolutely out-strategize them. Your peace of mind is the most expensive, valuable asset you will ever own. If someone requires you to bankrupt your self-worth just to keep them in your life, the price is too high. Close the account and walk away. Have you ever had to cut ties with someone who treated your relationship like a bad business transaction? Drop your story in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into surviving toxic dynamics. And remember, your freedom is always worth the investment.